my pleasure to welcome Father Terence Mary Naughtin. Father Terence entered the Order of Friars Minor Conventual at 16 years of age. He has been professed as a religious for 30 years and ordained to the priesthood for 23 years. During this time he has had various roles in the order, including being Master of Postulants and Novices. Father has worked in a number of parishes of the order in Australia and for many years has been involved in the promotion and education of the role of traditional liturgy, also known as the extraordinary form, in the life of the Church both here and overseas. He has been engaged widely in preaching retreats here and overseas, especially to various religious communities that have been involved in refounding and reinvigorating their communities together with lay retreats. He is a frequent speaker throughout Australia and has had extensive experience in the counselling of people with various addictions, especially those who have been involved in the area of homosexuality. Presently, Father has become the carer of his mother. May I introduce to you Father Terence Mary Naughtin.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, everyone. My mother turned 96 yesterday. She lives in a place called Yarrawonga, which is just down the river from here, about an hour away, so I'm popping back and forward. Well, thank you for this opportunity, and I just want to start, because it's the Church and homosexuality, I want to start as a good churchman would by saying a prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Our Lady, most pure, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. I also just want to set this address in the context of Scripture. And I, brethren, when I came to you, came not in loftiness of speech or of wisdom, declaring unto you the testimony of Christ. And my speech and my preaching was not in the persuasive words of human wisdom, but in showing of the Spirit and power, that your faith might not stand on the wisdom of man, but on the power of God. This topic, of course, is very broad in its nature, so we have quite a lot to cover. And I was speaking to the Honourable Fred Nile before, and we just made a brief reference to the fight over, same-sex marriage. And I said, I'm not going to refer to that in the address per se. We'll wait till we get to question time. I'm sure that will come up. What I want to do here is set this topic in the broader context of the sexual revolution. Of course, the distinction between a person being homosexual and performing or doing homosexual genital actions, while not always clear and convincing, is a very helpful and important distinction that we have to make from the outset, given that this is the Church and homosexuality. I want to start off by reading out for you what the Catechism of the Catholic Church has to say on homosexual person. Experiencing an exclusive or predominant sexual attraction toward persons of the same sex is most often an experience that is discovered, not freely chosen. Since in most cases it is discerned or discovered, not freely chosen, it is not automatically blameworthy. Thus, we can see that the Church, in that little encapsulation, has taken a fairly benign or accepting attitude toward the homosexual person who discover their inclination or their orientation toward the same sex. Yet with this, the Church has consistently taught that the act or those inclinations in engaging in homosexual genital activity are always objectively morally wrong. Sometimes in dealing with counselling people and so forth, I've heard anecdotal evidence and reports of individuals who are associated with the church, or organisations who sort of come in the general realm of the church's umbrella, as promoting or counselling people with same-sex attraction to practice fidelity in same-sex relationships rather than the virtue of chastity, or the secular equivalent, as Steve said this morning, of abstinence. I'm talking, of course, here from the church's angle, so I'm going to use the term chastity, the virtue. Of course, this is not only reprehensible, but it's gravely sinful on their part. To set the tone, of course, to turn things back, I believe, and the church certainly believes, that chastity, modesty and temperance are distinctive signs of a Christian civilization. And today, these have given way to the unbridled quest for carnal pleasure. Hedonism is unabated. To have any hope of an effective reaction to the homosexual offensive in modern society, we have to rest our efforts upon reinvigorating society's moral foundations, which must be firmly based on the Ten Commandments, as the Bishop made reference this morning when he talked about Cardinal von Galen, and the unchanging natural law. I presume most of us here are Catholics. If not, they're certainly very sympathetic. But Christians, we all are. And we, of course, should be filled with compassion in praying for those who struggle with the unrelenting temptations, the barrage of temptations that they have to face every day to sin in this way. We, of course, have to be charitable towards all sinners because we are sinners ourselves. And so we can't emphasise too much the Christian attitude that we have to have toward those who even publicly proclaim themselves as homosexuals. We as Christians, as I say, pray for all sinners, and we need to be praying a great deal at this time in our society when there is an agenda abroad, an ideological agenda to change the moral cohesiveness of our society. We are, of course, none the less conscious of the enormous difference between, as I said, individuals who struggle with this temptation of same-sex attraction and those who, for whatever reason, for pride or for the purpose of changing society as a whole, have given themselves over to identification with the gay agenda. Yet even these people, as I say, we have to pray for. And we have to take as our motivation as Christians, as Catholics, what St. Augustine, the great doctor of the church, said so simply so long ago, and that we've all heard many times. We have to hate the sin and love the sinner. How do we do this? Well, Augustine expounds this and explains it for us. He says, we do this so that we... he goes on to explain, is so that we wish him the best we can possibly desire for ourselves. What does this mean? It means that he or she may love God with a perfect affection. That's ultimately the reason why we take the stand that we do, so that we can bring people ultimately to love God. And so our stand as Christians has to be placed in that context. As I said at the outset, I want to place this talk, this address, in the broader context of what is really taking place. That the homosexual offensive in our society today is really the end result of the earlier sexual revolution. It's sort of the culminating point. The notion of sin, of course, in general, and the sin against chastity in particular, has faded to a great extent in our society. And it is fitting, I believe, to recall the principles of the natural law and Catholic teaching on this particularly delicate subject. If sexual intercourse were not enjoyable in itself, the propagation of the human race, which depends on it, would, of course, be gravely jeopardised. reason makes it very clear, however, that the purpose of this sexual conjugal act is not pleasure, but the perpetuation of the human species. To make pleasure the primary motive for sexual intercourse replaces the principal end of the act with its corollary. This inversion runs contrary to the act's very purpose. You all know that, you've heard it many times. Begetting new life brings with it the obligation to raise a child and care for his or her material needs, especially their education and their character formation. This is no small responsibility, as any parent well knows, and requires great sacrifice and dedication. Given man's rational nature, the bonds that unite the parents who beget new life with their children, who are the fruit of their union, are not ephemeral, as in the case with the lower species of animal. Among animals, as soon as the offspring is full grown, the maternal and the paternal relationships disappear. But for ourselves as human beings, we know that this relationship endures and goes on through life. Here I am living with my 96-year-old mother. As I tell her, I hope when she gets to heaven that she won't forget about us down here. It is an affection that lasts, as I say, for life and for even longer. Not even death, as I say, ceases this heartfelt relationship. All this demonstrates that only the loving permanent union between a man and a woman who desire to have children, raise them affectionately and provide mutual help and throughout the vicissitudes of life, provides an ideal condition for the begetting, the education of children. Hence, the conditions for sexual intercourse to entirely fulfill the noble end set down by God are only found in a monogamous and indissoluble relationship of marriage. So anything opposed to the main purpose of sexual intercourse, procreation and the begetting of children and so forth, is evil in the technical sense. What is evil in the technical sense? Well, it's something which is not to its ordered end. That's how St. Thomas would describe it. The main purpose, of course, can be frustrated in two ways, that is, of the conjugal act. Firstly, this can be done by artificially avoiding conception or by engaging in sexual acts that are sterile by their very nature, such as self-eroticism and, of course, homosexuality. Secondly, the purpose is violated when the fruitful nature of sexual intercourse per se is respected, but the parties lack the concern and the conditions to raise children properly, such as in the case with fornication, adultery, incest, etc. Although every directly procured act of consummated lust is a mortal sin, some are graver than others. We often don't hear this talked about or explained to us, hence the reason for this talk and for me starting where I'm starting. Adultery, for instance, is graver than simple fornication. It's not to recommend fornication. Incest is graver than adultery, which is not to promote adultery, and sins against nature, of course, are graver still because they are against nature. Sins against nature are not only opposed to the purpose of sexual intercourse, but in addition are contrary to the natural order of the sexual act as becoming to the human person. Our blessed Lord redeemed mankind, of course, as we know, by shedding his blood. And baptism, of course, washes away original sin, but of course it leaves that great mark there. And of course, with the disorder that original sin places in the soul, we have to remember that we all rely upon grace so that we may be pulled out of, giving way to our lower appetites and our distorted appetites. Lust is and does have a lasting and devastating effect upon the human soul, upon the human psyche. And with the growth of the pornographic industry, of course, in society, especially here in Australia in our own context, we often see coming with that grave sort of emotional problems that are growing and becoming more widespread amongst younger people, because they're so exposed at every level to pornography. So lust takes a great hold, and that's what we are fighting. And we need to reawaken within our society the notion and the idea that if we give way to our base appetites constantly, then we are going to lose the ability to have any kind of self-control, and therefore with it there is going to be an increasing measure of this mental disorder that's apparent in society. That anyone who has had any experience in counselling people who have addictions regarding sexual ones has experienced over and over again. On the individual plane, lust destroys peace of mind. It destroys an equitability of soul, or a nobility of soul, and spiritual desires, of course, become almost impossible to seek after, to run after. I know someone that I've known all of my life who is living in a same-sex relationship, and this person said to me not so very long ago that he no longer knows or can he believe in what the church teaches. And I've said to him, well, there's no surprise there for me, the surprise is for you. Because if you're living in a situation which is the antithesis of what God calls us to be, then there's going to be a darkening of the mind, a darkening of the intellect. And that darkening of the mind, that darkening of the intellect is ultimately a darkness in the soul. And of course that's what creates this psychological these psychological disorders that are apparent about us in society as a consequence of sexual addiction. The more one satisfies one's lusts, the more vehemently it's going to burn us. It's going to take hold. And so we are going to be unable to be drawn to out of ourselves, as it were, toward God, toward the supernatural, toward the spiritual. And of course it's only in that we can be saved. It's only in that we can be healed. It's only through the spiritual that we can find ultimately answer to such a problem. Lust numbers among the 7 capital vices, as I'm sure those of you who have studied the Catechism will know. And it feeds egoism, thoughtlessness, or rather creates self-centeredness. It creates a rashness and an instability. If anyone has had any dealings with people who are addicted to the homosexual lifestyle, they will understand immediately what I've just said. It's a very self-centered lifestyle. It's about me. There is a great rashness in the way that they go about life and how they spend themselves and their activities and so forth. There is a great instability running from one thing to another and from one partner to another, seeking consolation, seeking that ultimate satisfaction that is elusive to them. Of course, lust it can be extremely painful, ultimately, leading to sexually transmitted diseases, which has been spoken about elsewhere far better than here, such as AIDS and syphilis and all those sorts of unpleasant things. In society, lust favours corruption, fosters prostitution and pornography. It renders families unstable, and it encourages a contraceptive and an abortive mentality. And of course, it harms the upbringing of children, which I just lightly touch upon here because of the ideological gay thing trying to promote, same-sex adoptions and so forth. So that's very important to understand that the mentality, while it may look very, very nice, people may appear very sane and reasonable, and I'm not saying that they're insane, that's not what I'm saying at all, but there are deeper issues there that don't create a stable, well-balanced environment for the upbringing and for the proper education of children. I know I'm preaching to the choir. The virtue then of chastity liberates man, on the other hand, from the tyranny of concupiscence. It frees us, it opens us up to the supernatural, it opens us outward rather than always going inward, which is the problem with the sexual appetite. It makes us more able and more apt to be noble in disposition toward others. It gives us an openness to the supernatural and to the possibility and the reception of grace. We don't close the door on being open to God's grace. When the lower powers, I'm quoting St. Thomas here, when the lower powers are strongly moved towards their objects, the result is that the higher powers are hindered and disordered in their acts. Now the effect of the vice of lust is that the lower appetite, namely the concupiscible, is most vehemently intent on its object, to wit, the object of pleasure, on account of the vehemence of the pleasure. Consequently, the higher powers, namely the reason and the will, are most grievously disordered by lust. So, that's just a context of the broader context of this topic. Now, I want to move more into the homosexual side of things and explain a few things there. As we know, all the baptized are called to chastity. Married people are called to live conjugal chastity, and those who are not married to practice chastity in continence. This is how the Church explains it in her catechism. It's a shame that we don't really hear from the pulpit on Sunday talks on chastity. Now, as a priest, I'm very mindful, and people do often say to me, "Father, why don't you say this, or why don't you say something else?" And even good priests don't say this. But I'm very mindful that, you know, a sermon on a Sunday is not a catechetical class, and you're limited, you know, by people's ability to be engaged. You know, here we are at 2:30 on a very hot day. Thank God for air conditioning, and I won't mind if you all fall asleep. I'll understand. But, you know, these days people are not used to reading. They're used to overhead projectors and television and things going like that all the time, and computers. And so their ability to hear is being lessened, you know. They say a good sermon is 7 minutes and an excellent one is 5. Okay? And people can't, you know, unfortunately, we've lost the ability to hold people. It was a different era, you know, when we could give long sermons and so forth. Today we haven't got that. So what I'm trying to say is it's difficult for priests, even good priests, to be able to talk on these topics on Sunday, because there just isn't the time, and we haven't got the, as I say, the ability to be engaged for a long period of time. It is possible, of course, with God's grace, for everyone to live a chaste life, including persons experiencing same-sex attraction. To deny this, to deny that the power of God's grace enables those who are homosexual in orientation, in attraction, to live chastely, is to deny ultimately the efficacy of God's grace. That needs to be said long and loud, because, well, we don't hear anyone talking about grace anymore, and people unfortunately think that that's, I was going to say in fairyland, but no pun intended. But we need to drive that point home. We either believe in God's grace or we don't, and we need to pound that point home, as I say. There are certainly circumstances, such as psychological disorders and traumatic experiences, which can at times render this chastity more difficult. And there are conditions which can seriously diminish an individual's responsibility for lapses into chastity. As a priest, of course, and any priest will know how to counsel people, and we, you know, there are objective wrongs, and then there's a subjective gravity, and that's why we have the beautiful sacrament of confession, of penance and reconciliation, in order to be able to discern where people are at spiritually, and to use that as a means of delivering grace to lift us all up, but also of being able to discern, you know, how subjectively a sinner is guilty of this objective sin. So these circumstances and conditions, however, do not negate free will or eliminate the power of grace. While many men and women who experience same-sex attraction say their sexual desire for those of their own sex was experienced as a given, this in no way implies a genetic predisposition or unchangeable condition. As I say, to say that is to deny ultimately, God who is creator. Well, it's to say that God who is creator has created a sort of a separate species, a person, and then it denies again the efficacy of grace. So some surrendered to same-sex attractions because they were told that they were born with this inclination and that it was impossible to change the pattern of one's sexual attraction. Some persons may feel it is futile and hopeless to resist same-sex desires and embrace a gay identity. These same persons may then feel oppressed by the fact that society and religion, in particular the Catholic Church, do not accept the expression of their desires in homosexual acts. I use the term gay there advisedly. I think it was the bishop in his talk this morning talked about, society reinventing the meaning of words, and of course the homosexual people have done this with the word gay. So I think it was Mao Zedong who said, speak my words, think my thoughts. So we have to keep speaking properly, using the proper terms and harnessing it. The word homophobic, it's an invented word by George, I've just forgotten his name. I might have it here. It's, George Weinberger. And he's not a homosexual, but he certainly is follows the homosexual philosophy, if I can put it that way. He's a psychologist, and it was he who invented this word, the homophobe or homophobic. And I think I read a very good response to this from people on our side of the argument. But we need, when people accuse us with being homophobic, we need to say to them, can you please prove to me scientifically that this is a phobia? I think it's a very, very fine point. Face them on their own turf. You need to throw it right back at them. Now, the same thing with gay. My little quote on that is the only gay marriage in the context is between a man and a woman. Yeah. Okay? And I think they're the kind of little things you need on a placard, they're catchy and steal it back from, what the media and the ideologists are doing with beautiful language. So we have to be inventive. Now, the idea of a gay gene, I'm born that way. By the way, I'm taking a lot of this information from the Catholic Medical Association, who have done an awful lot of research in this area and to help us and to pass on. So none of this is new. None of this is something I'm making up. Or a lot of it, because of my experience pastorally, is stuff that I've seen in action and in reality. And see the truth of it, in fact. But I'm taking, as I say, a lot of the notes and so forth from the Catholic Medical Association. And if you can look it up, you can download these things quite easily and quite readily. But the idea of a gay gene has been spread abroad in society and in the media and so forth, electronic and printed media. And we're left thinking that, scientists have discovered a gay gene. Well, nothing evidently could be further from the truth, according to the Catholic Medical Association. A number of researchers have sought to find a biological cause, of course, for same-sexual attraction. The media has promoted the idea of a gay gene and that it has already been discovered. But in spite of several attempts, none of the much publicised studies, and there have been a number of them, has been scientifically replicated. A number of authors have carefully reviewed these studies and have found that not only do the studies not prove a genetic basis for same-sex attraction, the reports do not even contain such claims. If same-sex attraction were genetically determined, for example, one would expect and this is an example that I read of, but I've also had practical experience of this. One would expect twins, biological twins, to, if one was homosexual in orientation, the other one would be, but it's not always the case. There are, however, ongoing attempts to convince the public that same-sex attraction is genetically based. Such attempts may be politically motivated, and usually are, because people are more likely to respond positively to demands for change in laws and religious teaching when they believe sexual attraction to be genetically determined and therefore unchangeable. Others have sought to prove a genetic basis for same-sex attraction so that they could appeal to the courts for rights based on the immutability. Bishop Jarrett of Lismore put out a statement, a pastoral statement, over the recent, ALP conference, and they're changing their political platform. He did it with Professor Ray Campbell from Brisbane, and Ray Campbell made a very good point. Is he said this is not a matter of human rights. We need to, gay marriage and so forth. We need to move it away from that language. It's not a matter of human rights. Catholics believe that sexuality, of course, is designed by God as a sign of love of Christ, the bridegroom for his bride, the church, and therefore sexual activity is appropriate only in marriage. Catholic teaching holds that sexuality is ordered to the conjugal love of man and woman. In marriage, the physical intimacy of the spouses becomes a sign of the pledge of spiritual communion. Healthy psychosexual development leads naturally to attraction in persons of each sex for the other sex. Trauma, erroneous education and sin can cause a deviation from this pattern. Persons should not be identified with their emotional or developmental conflicts as though this were the essence of their identity. In the debate between essentialism and social construction, the believer in natural law would hold that human beings have an essential nature, that is, as I suggested earlier, either male or female and not some sort of other creation. And that sinful inclinations such as the desire to engage in homosexual acts are constructed and can therefore be deconstructed. I think it's important here too that it's probably wise to avoid using the word homosexuality as nouns, as describing people, I'm gay, that sort of thing. It's very unwise to identify, because I have had experience of people who have been very much involved in the gay world and have moved right away from it. And while it's been a traumatising experience for them, they don't want to be labelled as being homosexual, as that's their only worth, that's their only... so we don't do a service to going along with that. I think it's very important too, because this is a delicate topic, and it's really only one, I think I can say this without being excommunicated, I think it's only now really that the Church is starting to address this issue, and it's probably only because of what's happened, of the pedophile scandals and the sexual scandals that have happened broadly in the Church, that we're really now having to face this. The Protestant churches are streets ahead of us. Now, I say that advisedly because on the pastoral level, priests have always been dealing with this. So well or not so well, that's a different matter, but it has always been dealt with. So the Church has always been dealing with the problem, but I think it's only now that we're sort of getting our act together by way of providing sort of a means out there that's public for people to come and seek out help, such as Courage and Encourage, these groups that are established by the Church to help people get out of the culture. Individual experience same-sex attraction for different reasons. While there are similarities in the problems of development, each individual has a unique personal history. And that's very important when you're dealing with people, is not to place them, they're homosexuals, just, sort of in a block camp. We have to go to the person.
And I think that will help break down the sort of aversion, perhaps, that many people have of associating with known people who are known to be homosexually attracted. In the histories of persons who experience same-sex attraction, one frequently finds one or more of the following. For boys, the mother was overprotected. She was rather a dominant person. The mother was needy and demanding. The mother was unemotionally unavailable in the case of girls. Parents failed to encourage same-sex identification. You know, a lot of the homosexual activists will say, well, you know, teaching boys to play with trucks and girls to play with dolls is something that society has, you know, engendered. But my experience, as one who is not a parent other than in a spiritual way, is that, you know, boys and girls naturally go in that direction at some point. I'm sure parents can back me up on that. For boys, the lack of rough and tumble play, particularly with their father, failure to identify with same-sex peers, the dislike of team sports, and that might be for practical reasons. You know, I know myself, when I was young, I had very, very bad eyesight, you know, and absolutely hopeless at team sports. I play cricket, now to get it right here. So you have to find other avenues, you know, of providing what is needed there in the development and psychology of a child. The lack of hand-eye coordination and resulting teasing of peers, you know, especially in relation to boys playing sports and so forth. These are just practical things that can set up, as it were, these situations so that later when puberty comes on, one is leaning more in a direction than the other. Of course, the sad cases of sexual abuse and rape and those sorts of things, incest, all of that. Social phobia or extreme shyness. Parental loss through death or through divorce. That's particularly pertinent at the present time in society. As I mentioned earlier, you know, it breaks down the whole sociological structure, and so with the rising divorce rate and so forth, these things are also increasing. You know, older people often say, well, you know, why is it that now we seem to have so many homosexuals in society where, you know, 100 years ago we didn't? Well, maybe we have more people on the planet, but maybe there are more reasons for this happening now, because we've got away from the Judeo-Christian principles that inform the basic structure of society. Separations from parents during critical stages. I can think of two people that I know, both male, who have homosexual attraction, and they had a very fine relationship with their father. Very fine relationship with their father. But their father was away, travelling a lot of the time, you know, doing business or whatever, overseas trips and so forth. And so at a particular time, the developmental psychology of these two young men, he simply wasn't there for them. It wasn't because he didn't love them or whatever. Simply wasn't there for them. And there was no other male, strong male figure in their life to, you know, an older brother or whatever, to fill in the gap. So it's not always because, you know, the father's a bad father, far from it. Again, the way society is often set up, you know, mothers are taken out to work away from their children, fathers are also taken away from their children. So these are the problems that we have to be aware of. In some cases, same-sex attraction or activity occurs in a patient, I'm quoting the Catholic Medical Association here, with other psychological diagnoses, such as major depression, suicidal tendencies, anxiety disorders, substance abuse, conduct disorder in adolescence, and borderline personality disorders. So these medical things, psychological things, could also help to create or set up a situation where people are going to be, as it were, bent toward a certain direction. Sometimes, too, you'll find that after various traumas in life, that people will take to experiencing homosexual activity. And I can think of one case that I know where after someone had been abused in their marriage, they got involved in a lesbian encounter. Okay? So sometimes traumatic experiences can also set the situation up. If the emotional and the developmental needs of a person are properly met by families, we're talking about children especially, and peers, when they're developing same-sex attraction, it's very unlikely that that attraction will grow or will develop. Children need, of course, affection, as we all do, and they need praise and acceptance by each parent. It's not good enough just to let one do the cuddly, lovely stuff. Dads have to do it too. It's very important for dads to do it, to be tactile. And I think in our culture of Australia, I think it's broken down a bit now, but up probably until the 70s, wasn't very common. Men were a bit aloof, a bit emotionally aloof. And not all men, of course, but I think generally speaking that's true. I think it's still very important in our very macho sort of society that we realise, and that the men realise, that with their sons and boys, they need to be, tactile and emotional, to be emotionally engaged. Social and family situations, however, are not always easily established, and the needs of children are not always readily identifiable. Some parents may be struggling with their own trials and unable to provide attention and support when their children require it, especially if they're having troubles in their marriage and so forth, or difficulties at work. Sometimes parents work very hard, but with the particular personality of the child makes support particularly difficult. Some parents can see signs, but they fail to seek professional help for their children, sometimes because they don't know where to go. They don't know who to mention it to. According to the Catholic Medical Association, if one has a Catholic doctor, or a doctor who you might know is on side, they will often give you direction in that regard. It's important that those involved in the development of childcare and education become aware of the signs of gender identification, and that they realise that gender identification is now considered a disorder, one of the many new disorders that are out there to be marketed. It is considered a disorder by the Psychological Guild Association. And they need, people need to be aware that, as I say, there are places to go to in order to ascertain whether there is an identification problem there. For some, negative childhood experiences are overcome by later positive interaction. Some make a conscious decision to turn away from these temptations. For whatever reason, it might be religiously motivated, but it might also be because they're sick and tired of that lifestyle. I know one person that I have dealt with who wasn't even a Christian, and I just simply had a chance meeting on the public train in Sydney, and I wasn't wearing jeans and a t-shirt at the time, and he simply came up to me during Gay Mardi Gras week, and he simply said he was sick and tired. I was sitting there minding my own business, and he wanted to get out of this lifestyle, not because he didn't even believe in God, okay, but he knew I did, and wanted to get out. And so I couldn't do much for him other than talk to him and so forth then and there, and have a few conversations later on, but I directed him where to go and where to get help. And we have, in Sydney, we have some very fine Catholic psychologists and so forth that you can direct people to. So, again, it may not be religiously motivated, but it often is. The presence and power of God's grace, of course, is not something which can be discounted at all as a factor in helping people out. The labelling, of course, of people, especially in their teen years and so forth, is a very, very dangerous and detrimental thing. And I know when, back in the 70s, labelling people as, if I may use the term, as faggots or all those sorts of things, very unpleasant. And perhaps we moved a little on from that. I hope we had. But and if there's an upside on the acceptance of homosexuality, that's probably it. Okay. Now, therapy. This is a very touchy subject, especially with the gay activists, the homosexual activists, and they will deride this notion that there is, therapeutic, that there is to be considered therapeutic help available. No, they just do not want to hear about it. Those promoting the idea that sexual orientation is immutable frequently quote from a published discussion between certain doctors, Dr. C. Tripp and Dr. Lawrence Hattier, and which Dr. Tripp states, there is not a single recorded instance of a change in homosexual orientation which has been validated by outside judges or testing. That's what he says. However, Dr. Tripp says, I have cured many homosexuals. Another doctor also says that there is research which may be examined. His name is Dr. Pomeray, who says that these people may come and examine my research work because it is all documented over a period of 10 years with tape recordings. Many of these cured, he prefers to use the word change rather than the word cured, patients have now married, have had families and live very happy lives. It is a destructive myth that once a homosexual, always a homosexual. It has made and will make a million more committed homosexuals. It has made and will make millions more committed homosexuals to believe that there is no way out. What is more, not only have I, but many other reputable psychiatrists have also reported their successful treatments of treatable homosexuality. A very famous name in this whole debate is a fellow by the name of Spitzer, who's a medical doctor, and he works out of Columbia University Psychiatric Research Department. And he said he's been directly involved in various discussions to remove, or was at least back in the early 70s, about 1973, to remove homosexuality from the American Psychiatric Association to be listed as one of its mental disorders. So he was heavily involved in that debate, and it was removed. But he has more recently said and been involved in the research for the possibility of change. And he says, Dr. Spitzer, he says, I am convinced, quote, that many people have made substantial changes toward becoming heterosexual. I think that's new. I came to this study sceptical. I now claim these changes can be sustained. So these are not negligible people. These are people of, repute and renown. And so we need to know these people's names. We'll be able to have access to finding out who they are, to know that they're there. So as I say, we can put it back out. We can counteract. Now the goals of therapy, to realign people's sexual orientation. Those who deny the possibility of total change admit that change in behaviour is possible, and that persons who have been sexually involved with both sexes appear more able to change. A careful reading of articles opposing therapy for change reveals that many of these authors and therapists see change as an unethical thing. It's unethical because they simply have an agenda. They have an ideology which is driving them for whatever reason, and they see it as unethical. It views those persons with same-sex attraction who express a desire to change as victims of social or religious oppression and bigotry. You and I are bigots. It should be noted that almost without exception, those who regard therapy as unethical also reject abstinence from non-marital sexual activity as a minimal goal. So this is why it's important for us, as I say, from the aspect of being Christians in the church, to again, not just talk about abstinence. Yes, we have to use that language where and when necessary, but for ourselves to realise the importance of the virtue of chastity, of purity, and self-denial, not merely self-restraint, which is not a virtue. All research, it seems, concludes that evaluated in the light of these therapists and so forth, that there is truly a possibility to change. For a Catholic with same-sex attraction, the goal of therapy should be freedom to live chastely according to one's state in life. Freedom to live chastely according to one's state in life. I mentioned that the use of the word change or cure is something that is used a bit interchangeably, and someone, I think, from the church's perspective, is considered to be cured, to be changed, when they are living a chaste life, and that's all that we as the church ask. What one's whether one's sexual orientation at a very deep level actually can be changed into being heterosexual activity or not is irrelevant as far as the church is concerned. It's that they live chastely according to their state in life. The goal of therapy is to live chastely. Some of those who have struggled with same-sex attractions believe that they are called to live a celibate life. They should not be made to feel that they have failed to achieve freedom because they do not experience desire for the opposite sex. Others wish to marry and to have children. There is every reason to hope that many will be able to do so in time to achieve this goal. They should not, however, be encouraged to rush into marriage or be pushed into marriage, so that this is seen as some sort of magical cure to this same-sex attraction. There is ample evidence to show that this actually is counter-effective. With the power of grace, of course, and the sacraments and support from the wider community, the Christian community, these things can take place. Change can happen, and determined individuals should be able to achieve the inner freedom which our blessed Lord promises all of us if we ask it. Those who have been involved in counselling or therapy and so forth with various individuals often know and uncover the deeper root, the deeper issues that are there in people's lives, and that's really the question or the thing that we've got to get to. Whenever you see anyone that's got an addiction, whether it's a sexual addiction or an alcoholic drug addiction, whatever it is, there is always a deeper issue. Always a deeper issue. I know someone who was involved in bestiality, and a very sad story, and the person in revealing his soul to me, told me how he had a lovely dog, was his only friend as a child, and his father was a drunk. And one day his father came home and held a gun at his head, and then turned around and held a gun at the child's head, and then turned around and shot himself on the child's bed. And I missed the crucial point. Sorry. Before that, the father came home drunk and he kicked the dog to death in front of the kid and then So anyone with a heart and a little bit of reason can see what happened. Okay. So you have to uncover the root causes of it. That's why it's so incumbent on us as Christians, not to fall into labelling or to pushing people away or to be feel overly sensitive or what's the word, tainted by association with people. It's very, very important. If there's one thing I'd like you to go away with, it's that. You know, people will think I'm gay, I'm queer, I'm whatever, because I associate. Get over it. Now, just women with same-sex attraction, I just want to mention this briefly, often have had conflicts with their fathers and or other significant males in their life, and they have had trust issues. Perhaps they've been abused. One case that I dealt with well, it was kind of, there was that, and then she was sexually introduced to sexual activity by her older brother. Okay, so she got into lesbian association because of that abuse and that mistrust. So these are often, I'm just trying to give you examples of deep issues that are there in people's lives that we have to get to in order to help people move forward and move beyond. Catholics working with Catholic individuals should feel free, of course, to use the wealth of Catholic spirituality in this whole healing process. Those who have what they call father wounds can be encouraged to develop their relationship with God, a loving Father. When I was in the seminary, I remember, professors who are fairly liberal in their broader view of theology and so on, saying, there's no use talking about God our Father because so many people, so many women particularly, have negative views about men because of their father. Okay? And I remember thinking at the time, well, hello. Can't we give them a positive view of men, a positive fatherhood view by referring to God as God our Father? Can't we counteract it? But that seemed to be sort of lost on them. That is sort of get that. Why, I don't know. So I think there is every reason at the end of the day for hope that with time those who seek freedom will find it. However, the question or the hurdle that we face is actually letting people know that there is help out there. Okay? Because people are hearing all the time that the positive sides of homosexuals and being accepted and so forth and so on, and that's out there all the time. But these people still often hurt this, and they don't know what to do, they don't know where to go, they feel rejected on all fronts, except by the gay society. So our problem is getting the message out, opening the doors to them. And as I say, the evangelical churches are streets ahead of us in this. We have courage, we have encourage, which is the parents who have discovered that their children are living this kind of lifestyle. Courage is the people who are in the, or have homosexual proclivities and inclinations to help. But again, it's very small in Australia, and most people have not even heard of it, don't know where to go if they have heard of it. So it's getting the message out there. It's another thing to take away and take with you, and to spread the message out that there is help for people. I don't know if I've waffled on too long, but I think maybe we can sort of get ready for some questions. But I think just before I finish, I just want to again place this whole thing, as I said at the beginning, in the broader context of the sexual revolution. I think I said at the beginning that the homosexual agenda now is at the tail end of the sexual revolution that started in the 1960s. It sort of started before with the softening up of the emotions through Hollywood and so forth. I don't know if any of you remember a Greta Garbo film that was called Camille. And of course, La Traviata is actually, the opera La Traviata, Martineau, is actually a spin-off of that. But, but there's with that, it was a kind of a watering down, a sort of a softening up of emotion. And and you see this in the debate with engaging people who are either pro-homosexual or who are questioning, it's all about emotion. It's all about emotion, and that's what a Holy Father is, goes to great pains to talk about, using our intellect, being rational, reason. The whole of all of these things are on the level of emotion. And I had a situation in my own family recently where one of my family members, who doesn't extol the virtues of homosexuality at all, but asked me, well, why is it that we're against gay marriage? Why is it? It's no good to be just told, well, the church says no to gay marriage. She said no to lots of things. No good saying no. We need to know the reasons. They need, about the fidelity and permanence and stability in society, mental well-being, health, and all of these sorts of things need to be actually put down in point form and put out. And actually, I haven't had the opportunity, but I'd like to tell some of the bishops, put out pastoral letters on this, so that, in point form, so that they can be taken home. The Cardinal in Sydney with, what's his name? Jensen, at the point of the ALP platform, they said no, but they failed to say, why no? Well, that's no help to anybody, quite frankly. And I'd like to have the opportunity to tell him that in the nicest possible way. But it's because, I'm not having to go with Cardinal by any means, but again, my own experience is that people want to know why. They need the ammunition to be able to expound it. So of course, the unbridled hedonist sort of society that we now live in is at the point that we're coming now that we're at of the final frontier, as it were, with same-sex gay marriages. And it's because of this softening up approach that has taken place right from, say, Greta Garbo and Camille and things like that, and have watered down the softening of emotions, so that we now get to this point. Make no mistake, but the homosexual agenda is to break down this last frontier. This is the last frontier. So we need really to meet it full on head on. And it is the, they well know that at heart, the sexual revolution is a revolt against all the norms of Christian Judeo-Christian morality. They know that. And that's what they want to overturn. The sexual liberation movement is there to destroy any sense of modesty, any sense of temperance, the virtues. They want to break down all those things, and they've succeeded, in great part with, the changing in fashion, the broad immodesty in dress that is there. All these things contribute to it, and we as Catholics, we need to look at ourselves again. And I'm not saying that we need to, become Catholic Amish. We need to be, I think St. Hippolytus said way back, we do not live in different houses, we do not eat different food, we do not, wear different clothing. So, no, but yet we are different. Okay, so we need to find ways of, not being Catholic Amish, but being different. But there's nothing worse, and for the women, when they start to wear, long denim skirts and orange socks. It's not a good look. I don't mean that by way of modesty. Not at all. But being feminine, okay? Being feminine. And creating the distinctions between, this is another thing that drives the homosexual agenda, is the androgyny. The blurring of the distinction of the sexes. It's very, very important. But we as Christians keep those distinctions alive. That men be men, they be seen to be men, and to understand what being a man is. Being a man doesn't mean you have to be sort of, playing macho and butch or whatever it is. But being a man also means understanding when to be strong, when to be gentle, and the respect of the other sex and so forth, and for women to find ways to be feminine. Okay, I just want to tell you a funny story just on that point. Years ago, this would be 20 years ago, sort of in the midst of the feminist uprising, one of our friars was on a tram in Melbourne at about 5 or 6 o'clock on a Friday evening, and people were standing up, you know, and this woman got in who was very heavily pregnant, and she had a briefcase and sort of power suit on, and he stood up to let her have a seat, and she turned and she scowled and she said, "There's no need to stand up because I'm a woman," to which Father very quickly responded, I did because I'm a gentleman. 6 months later, but he brought it right on the spot. And the people in the tram did exactly what you did. She was left standing.
Perhaps, Father, would you like to take questions now? Great. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we'll only be able to have 3 questions. And I'll ask Michael if you can take the microphone. Over there, please.
Could I just say, Father, Robert Spitzer, you mentioned, most dramatically was involved, as you said, in the removal of the homosexual condition from the diagnostic list of the American Psychiatric Association. And 20 years later, as you said, he turned around, but he published a list of 200 cases who have had their conditions reversed. It was the most dramatic turnaround in the debate, and we need to know the facts.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Franz. The question I'd like to ask is, you said that talking about these topics, homosexuality, how you voice, etc., from the pulpit is not suitable because the average attention span is very short. At the same time, education about these topics is vital. Then what and how can it be done on a regular basis? Because I also find out that those suggested pamphlets that may or may not come are not being read by the people who need to read. Thank you.
It wasn't suitable. In some cases it might be unsuitable, you know, because you've got a general audience of children and so forth. But I think it's not always what's the word I'm looking for? It's not always easy to do that. I think I also said that bishops need to put out pastoral letters, you know, point by point. And I think, you know, especially if Father is not particularly a scintillating preacher, he might be able to put out a few point forms in his parish newsletter so that people at least can read that while he's preaching. And we need to find inventive ways. Well, this is a case in point, but not, you know, you're sort of unique to the species, people that are here. You know, well, you are, and you need to be proud of it. But not everyone has the ability all the time or the convenience of being able to come to such an event as this. So again, I think you need to go back into your parishes and you know, put your money where your mouth is and say, Father, we want to have a parish hall, and this is what we want to talk in, and we'll invite Joe Blow or Sister Mary Paphnutius or Father or whatever, come and talk about these things. I think you need to be inventive and to use the facilities that are there.
So, Father, 2 months ago, the Obama administration has announced that it is making the promotion of homosexuality a principal goal of U.S. foreign policy, alongside of promoting economic development and democracy and other legitimate goals. We have an election coming up on the 4th, and he may be pandering to one of his constituencies, but my question is the Australian government in its foreign aid program also promoting homosexual rights?
That's yes. I mean, there's a whole pandering to the gay agenda in this country. That's it in a nutshell. I mean, it's the same in America, you know. There doesn't seem to be anyone with an honourable exception in the front row here who's really standing up head and shoulders above anyone else to fight. Does that answer your question?
It does, sadly.
Sorry, Father. Just one thing you mentioned, in relation to the constant use of the word same-sex, it really gets up my nose because sex is an action. I challenge everyone all the time to say same gender, which brings it back to what it actually is, and I'd just like your comment on that.
Well, thank you for that distinction. I think that's very good, and something I'll take home. That's very good. It's very good.
Thank you, everyone. We knew this was going to be topical, so perhaps we can thank Father again, please. So maybe we can take away courage and compassion when we're dealing with homosexuality.
I just want to point out what's written on the bottom of wine here. A quote from 1 Timothy 5:23. Do not continue to drink only water, but make use of a little wine.
She